Welcome to CISO's Insiders podcast, powered by GRC Consulting. In this podcast, we'll be interviewing leading CISOs and security leaders in the industry for light, eye-level conversations. Here, they share advice and tips, talk about their biggest accomplishments and failures, favorite drinks, key influencers, and much more. We encourage you to walk away with at least one insight that will help you better yourself or your business. Thank you for joining us, and we hope you enjoyed today's episode. For more content, please check us out on social media.
Hello, everybody. Today I'm sitting down and having a chat with Chad Hicks, the current CISO of MercuryGate International. Chad, would you like to introduce yourself?
Certainly. Yeah, thanks for the invite. My name is Chad Hicks. As we mentioned there, I work with MercuryGate International. We're a shipping and logistics company. I've been a CISO for the last couple of years there. Previously, I was a BISO at XPO Logistics. And then before that, I was a CISO at a healthcare company. My background is mostly in IT. So I came up from the information technology side of the house. I was a sysadmin. I punched down network terminals, worked in data centers, and worked my way up to being a CISO. And so really happy to be here today and excited to share kind of my story on how I got here.
Nice. Thank you for that introduction. And before we get started, maybe we could you could tell the listeners a bit more about yourself, maybe with a couple of icebreaker questions. If you're willing to share your marital status and favorite drink, that would be awesome way to start.
Yeah, so I am married. I've been married for over 10 years now. Have a daughter who's kind of my pride and joy. And then favorite drink, I like a Coca-Cola, right? I mean, it's kind of bad for me and not good on my waist or some of my, healthcare stuff. But certainly love a soda. Instead of a cup of coffee in the morning, I'll go down and grab a Coca-Cola and I buy the smaller cans now, which seem to cost more than the big cans. But
unless you buy them at Costco, and then you can get like a 30 pack of 30 cans or whatever.
I was just there yesterday, picked up a 30-pack. You're spot on.
Yeah, I know. I mean, for me, if I could, I would drink Coca-Cola all day, every day. But as you mentioned, it's not that good for me, and certainly not good for my weight. So I'm trying to avoid it as much as I can. But I do, indulge every once in a while. Well, great, Leah. Let's get started. Anxious to hear your story and your journey. And obviously, you mentioned that you grew up from the IT field, so you would have more to contribute on that front, as opposed to some, CISOs out there that might have had more experience with like software development or compliance and whatnot. So yeah, we'll try to dig into some of these topics as we go forward. Let's get started. If there's one thing that you wish you'd known before you began your career, what would that be?
I think the biggest thing that I learned was first impressions die hard, right? So a couple times in my career, I came in and maybe overestimated how important it was to come in kind of quiet like a field mouse, right? Understand the status quo and understand how the organization worked. You come in and you have all these grand ideas and you want to make a difference and make a big splash. And before you try and attempt to reinvent the wheel, it's important to kind of understand how the organization works beforehand.
Yeah, I'm sorry for that. I was looking for the unmute button. Yeah, that certainly resonates, especially when you get started, right? You want to make all these big changes, and sometimes as you grow older, you realize that sometimes listening is actually a good piece of advice. Before you start speaking, but thanks for that. And if there's one like big failure that you could, that you can think of, and what did you learn from it? What would that be?
Yeah, I mean, this kind of goes hand in hand with the first question you asked. I was hired as a software engineer for a company that worked in NASCAR racing. I don't know, this was almost a decade ago. Things weren't exactly common in that industry right now. Yeah, so the biggest failure I think that I've experienced, I was hired as a software engineer for a company that worked in the racing space, so in NASCAR. This was over a decade ago, and software engineers weren't exactly common in that space. or even in that industry. So I came in young, highly paid, confident engineer. I thought, I could, change the world when I went in there. And along the way, I kind of rubbed folks the wrong way, and it kind of stifled my growth there. So I learned a ton, one being what we already talked about, first impressions die hard. And then since then, I've kind of been much more humble and more successful, right? As I came into my BSO role and into the CISO role, coming in and learning from those that have been, maybe with the company for 10 years, you can certainly get a lot more from the listening side, as you kind of highlighted before.
Well, thank you. Let's talk a bit about your accomplishments then.
Yeah, personally, my biggest accomplishment's my daughter. She's my pride and joy, seeing her succeed in her various extracurricular activities. She's, in dance, she does gymnastics, she does soccer, she plays chess, and she's in elementary school, right? So those are things that I didn't even think about doing until, I got a little bit older. And then professionally, completing the MSIT program at Carnegie Mellon was a big one for me. It opened a ton of doors. And then I also learned from some of the brightest industry leaders. I learned from folks that worked at US CERT and ran, one of the largest computer emergency response task force in the world, right? So really, really cool things. And it's really nice to be working with those industry leaders, and to, graduate with honors from there was really a big accomplishment for me. And then, one of the other ones that I highlight is I worked closely with a company a few years ago doing some consulting, and, we remediated over 500,000 vulnerabilities in less than 6 months. So that was another huge highlight along the way.
Got it. Let's talk a bit, let's dig deeper into your career path. Curious to learn more about how you ended up, being a CISO, especially given that you grew up through the, you mentioned IT industry, you also mentioned software engineering. Can you just, briefly tell that story to us?
Yeah, so I started out, a lot of folks, I mentor some high school students now, and they don't know exactly what they want to do. I always knew I wanted to work in IT and then, computers in some way, right? Even going back to middle school, that was always my direction. And so I went to my undergrad, I got a CIS degree. So I learned a lot of software engineering, C, C++, Java, even some COBOL for some of your older listeners. And then I got my first job in Southern West Virginia, where I'm from. And, there's not a whole lot of software development that happens there. And so I got a job as a sysadmin, doing day-to-day IT work for a company. And what ended up happening is I was their first full-time IT hire, and the company was going through a massive stage of growth. So what ended up starting out as a sysadmin job ended up as an IT director role with, a couple people working for me, and then handling not only just, servers and patching, but running the entire network. Software, we actually hired an offshore team to do some development work for us to make some custom apps. And then, as I got a little bit older, I came to this crux of, where do I want to specialize, right? Do I want to continue down the IT generalist path? I didn't feel like that was the most rewarding financially. There's a lot of folks out there that can, patch servers and do Windows updates and stuff like that. And so I chose to specialize. And when I went to Carnegie Mellon, I was lucky enough to dual major there. So I majored in business intelligence, data analytics, and cybersecurity. And I figured one of those two would be a great role, great job. And by that point, I'd already kind of migrated into the compliance side of the world at the healthcare entity I was working at. We were beholden to HIPAA compliance, high tech, and all that. So became really, really close to that, and saw some large companies go through ransomware incidents. The local healthcare facility that we transported patients to ended up having a massive ransomware incident. And so it's like that security thing is probably important, and kind of chose to really delve into that. Ended up being their CISO there, and gradually migrated to larger roles, larger organizations. Got my CISSP, followed that up with CCSP, CISM, and then recently just got the EC Council CISO certification. So that's kind of how I started and how I ended up where I'm at now.
Got it. And I know you're an adjunct professor, and you also mentioned that you work with high schoolers, so you're pretty much like a mentor of sorts. What would your advice be for someone who's wanting to pursue a career in cybersecurity, or eventually land in like positions similar to yours?
Yeah, the biggest thing is you can't fake your way into cybersecurity. You have to put in the work. Sure, there's different routes to get here. You kind of hinted at there's various ones, the compliance route, the IT side, you can come up through audit, those kind of pieces. But since cybersecurity touches nearly every facet of the business, you really need to be well-rounded in all aspects of IT and even the business. Many people ask me, how do I get that first job in cybersecurity? I always tell them, get a job in IT, whatever they can. You talk about mentoring. I just started mentoring someone who was an aspiring cybersecurity engineer going to Western Governors University, which appears to be a pretty good program from what I've seen some of the folks come out of there. And she got her first role as in help desk, just answering questions and working with folks on the day-to-day. And then she just landed her first cyber specific gig. She was promoted from an internal help desk role to, becoming their security engineer. So really that's my best practice, is just get in there, start doing the work, and then eventually you'll find the right roles.
Yeah, and also you'll find your passion and what's of interest to you specifically, and then carve your own way. Thank you. And I know you mentioned a couple times, we've already spoken about the fact that you're basically an IT guy, right? So what are your feelings about the role of the CISO that's actually part of IT? I can only assume that your role right now is probably under the IT organization.
Yeah, I report into our CTO right now, and all of my roles have been part of the IT organization. So I can only speak to what I assume to be the benefits or downsides of a CISO outside of IT, because I haven't directly experienced. But the biggest positive is how close you are to the IT teams. Weekly staff meetings, I work with the requisite leaders, our VP of Dev, VP of Infrastructure, being very close to those. We sit in meetings every week and I can hear their pain points and understand, what they're working on. And basically, if you were to report into maybe finance or the chief risk officer, you may not have that direct exposure. But it does come with some risk, right? How do you hold your management? Say if your CTO or CIO is not aligned with what you're pushing for, right? Or maybe you feel like they're not the most security minded people. Luckily, where I've been, it's not been an issue, as the companies I've worked at have all been very pragmatic and also highly valued security. And I think it also, helps if you're not just, being the department that says no all the time and working collaboratively with the different teams. It's amazing how quickly you can resolve things if you kind of treat security as a team sport.
Yeah, and you don't feel that there are instances where a conflict of interest issues arise?
It certainly could, but it really comes down to, do you have a good leadership that understands the importance, right? And then the ability to skip levels too. In a good IT or good information security organization, you should be talking directly to the senior leadership of the company, be it the CEO, CFO, or board of directors, or some combination thereof. And so, like I follow ISO 27001, and so we do quarterly management reviews with those stakeholders. And so even if there was an instance in which that may come up, we kind of can work through that through those management review meetings as well.
Got it. And what are as growing professionally and personally, I'm assuming I know you mentioned getting your CISSP and a bunch of other certifications. You also mentioned ISO 27001. What were the best resources that have helped you carve your way and, basically put you in the place that you're in right now?
Yeah, I can't scream the praises of ISO 27000 series enough, right? When you don't know how to do something or what the best practice is, you can certainly go to their documentation and get great resources. There's others, right? NIST, for example, being part of an international organization, sometimes NIST isn't recognized with some of our European partners. And so ISO is basically recognized everywhere, and I consider it to be one of the most comprehensive standards out there, especially 27002, which gives you kind of pragmatic advice on how to affect controls, maybe some ideas, some things you haven't thought of. We talked with our auditors before about the shoulds and the shalls of the standard, right? So these are things you should be doing, and it gives you, kind of that other viewpoint So I couldn't imagine doing my job without that. And then additionally, I can't sing the praises of CISA enough. Every day, our threat and vulnerability management team receives various alerts that they publish, sometimes even faster than the vendors themselves want to publish it. And it's a big component of all the paid threat feeds out there, right? CISA, I'm sure, feeds into all the major players that publish and sell those threat feeds. And we get very similar information from CISA from a mailing list. And it's, the federal government certainly has its challenges, but CISA is a kind of a shining star in that example.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. I can't recall when was the last time I met someone who was actually passionate about ISO 27001. Myself as an ISO 27001 lead auditor, and I also I co-founded another company that's a certification body for ISO 27001, 27701. That's a hard commodity to come by. Thank you for that. Let's talk a bit about the industry. What's the one common myth of the industry that you wanted to debunk?
That we need more tools in cybersecurity. I've got plenty of tools, right? I don't need any new tools or technologies or whiz-bang things. The majority of threats that we see are pretty well-defined methods. You look at the Verizon data breach report or the IBM report or any of those threat intel sources, and you'll see that the tools, the threat vectors that the bad guys are doing are things that we can likely detect with our existing tool sets, right? So we don't really need more tools or technologies. I'm sure the next AI generated, log reading tool is certainly very cool. But in general, we don't really need more tools or technologies. We need more people, process, and time. That's what we need. That's really the solution to a lot of these problems we see.
So how do you rebuttal that AI claim that everything's going to be, not everything, but a lot of what we're doing is going to be automated, especially in the incident response space, maybe, and maybe other spaces that we can't really think of right now. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, we're certainly at a watershed moment right now. ChatGPT came out, and it was a big one that gave access to generative AI and kind of exposed the masses to the power of AI platforms. But I've sat in many sales demos of these latest and greatest tools and technologies, and I have a number of vendors who claim to be using next generation AI ML models to be able to do these type of detections. And certainly it helps. It's a tool in the tool belt. And I think when I say we don't need new tools, I don't think that we should throw away the tools we have, but augmenting existing tools and technologies like a SIM, for example, right? You can look at the various SIMs out there. They can do anomaly detection, and that can be empowered by AI and ML. But a lot of those need to be trained. They're not exactly out of the box going to find the right stuff. And so the people and the process and the time that goes into doing that is really the thing that unlocks that value. And the other part is the economics of it. None of these AI startups are profitable. And if you look at the price point for what Copilot, for example, Microsoft's charging, it's certainly a hard economic thing to make whenever you have to use all this CPU and GPU accelerated compute. So more to come. I think it will change the way we do things, but probably not as soon as most people think.
Mm-hmm. And in your opinion, what are the main concerns that chief information security officers have these days?
Yeah, well, I want to stay out of prison. There's been a lot of stuff that's came up here lately with some CISOs, and so the recent court cases have really been eye-opening from a personal liability standpoint. Some of those were egregious, right? And those guys may have done things that they shouldn't have or covered things up, but it is concerning seeing the CISO put up there and not CIOs or CTOs standing alongside them. Considering most often they do report into those type of IP leaders, and depending on the case specifics, it may be a little bit different, but certainly something that made me talk to our legal about, am I on the D&O insurance and am I covered, and those kind of pieces. And then aside from that, things that we see in the Verizon data breach report, which I talked about before, the IBM report on security incidents, a lot of it's the same stuff that we've seen for some time: phishing, ransomware, credential theft, known vulnerabilities. Third-party risk is huge, right? There was just recently a big thing from CISO on CISINs, for example, that was published that some people thought might be the next SolarWinds incident, which I don't know if it worked out to be that. We still kind of TBD on that one. But you know, none of those items that I talked about should surprise anyone. Generative AI is certainly a big buzzword right now, and we're all a little bit worried on how our data is going to end up in some of those large language models. And so that's an area that I'm a little bit worried with myself. You know, how do I control what leaves the organization? You know, because these tools used to be kind of gatekept, and now they're sitting in, you know, Teams windows and browser windows and being ran, you know, basically beside of you know, day-to-day work. And so those are kind of the stuff that you know, maybe keep me up at night a little bit now.
Mm-hmm. And are there any so this was you know, areas of concerns for the CISOs, and any areas that in your opinion should be that CISOs should be focused on? And I know it goes hand with hand, you know, with the previous question.
Yeah, I mean, depending on your org, right, you should know where your biggest risks are. You know, look at your existing tools that I talked about before, and they'll kind of tell you where are your threats coming from. But phishing, you know, I can't stress that enough. They always go after the weakest link. I just saw like Novaport reported that somebody tried to use a deep fake to get somebody to reset some credentials. So that's an area, you know, making sure end users are trained, and ransomware readiness, you know. A lot of times people have said if it's not if, it's when that all those type of attacks will happen. So making sure you have solid BCP plans, restoration capabilities. You know, you don't want to be paying the, you know, millions of dollars that these ransomware gangs are going out there for. And identity, right? Identity as the edge is kind of I think an up and coming piece. Maybe it was a buzzword a couple of years ago that got bumped from AI and ML now, but you know, how do we protect these identities that seem to be ubiquitous across all of the different platforms? And you know, if somebody compromises a user account and you have single sign-on everywhere, that's a pretty big blast radius. Or even in the cloud, for example, like AWS, it's all very much driven off of IAM policies and how you control the various aspects there for like EC2 instances. So those are areas I would focus on.
Mm-hmm. And you know, diving even deeper on the CISO role, what are the more important skills that the CISO nowadays should have, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think a lot of people think that we own the risk, or you know, we're some sort of magical Santa Claus for risk, but in general, we are a business leader first, right? We are supposed to be officers of the company. So we should be a business leader first and then a technical advisor second. We need to understand how security plays into the business. Is it a value add, or are we just insurance against something bad happening? And then you need to be a technical advisor, right? You don't need to know how to code against a cross-site scripting attack. But you know, as a CISO, you should be able to ascertain, is this a big problem or a small problem? Is this something we need to, you know, wake people up out of bed for and, you know, disrupt, you know, maybe the next release, delay features, have things that are high impact to the business? Or is this something that can wait until, you know, we can handle it through our normal, you know, change management processes and those pieces? You know, we don't own the risk. We are risk informers. And so how do we make sure that the appropriate business unit leaders can make those informed decisions?
Mm-hmm. And before becoming a CISO, you've held a number of other positions in the cybersecurity industry. In your opinion, how did the CISO role transition in the past, let's say, I don't know, 10, 15 years?
Yeah, so I think, you know, we're certainly getting elevated in the modern era here. The new SEC rulings on mandatory reporting will also elevate the rules, or elevate the roles in the near future. But it's certainly becoming more and more prominent. I think it just follows the attacks, right? As attacks get more and more common, and we see more impact, ransomware, you know, costing the business, manufacturing facilities that are hard down because of a massive ransomware incident, and they can't produce, you know, their widgets, for example. That's really, I think, what's drove us to elevate the security role, because it really is impacting the bottom line, right? Be it if you have a massive incident or just a small incident, and you have to pay for damages to people whose, you know, information was out there. it's all kind of coming home to roost, as they would say, right? We have to ensure we're reducing that risk so that we make informed risk decisions and not not waste the company's money. At the end of the day, it's all about shareholder value, and we're not spending that money to pay a ransom to some guy. We want to invest into the company, build value, and provide those pieces.
Yeah, and do you feel that the CISO role would grow into a bigger role in the next few years, or do you think it's gonna pretty much stay the same as it is right now?
It's tough to tell, right? I mean, the new SEC rulings on mandatory reporting certainly make us more important, but at the end of the day, we have kind of a role to play with the CIO and with the chief risk officers, and so I don't anticipate any earth-shattering changes there. But I think in some of the larger organizations, you may see the CISO role elevated slightly. But really, it kind of, we're all dealing with risk. So like that chief risk officer role is probably the one that'll grow the most, and then they'll just kind of absorb a lot of the CISO risk management functions and then be informed from the CISO is kind of where I see it going.
Mm-hmm. And do you feel, this is just an follow-up question, do you feel that there is any advancement to the CISO role? Like, what's next for
Yeah, I've actually seen a couple CISOs, be promoted to CTO or CIO, and I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think that is an area where we will see growth for those that are sitting in my seat, because we know all facets of the business, right? I know the IT side, I know the infrastructure side, I know the dev side, I know our product side, I know our business side. And so very few people, even the ones that are maybe VP of infrastructure or SVP of hosting operations or those kind of things, they may have a small portion of that, but few people in the organization have as wide of a responsibility as the information security org does, because we have to know basically everybody and everything and understand how it adds business value. And a lot of times, we're participating in RFPs and RFQs where they're asking questions of the CISO, of me, as they're purchasing our tools. So I even get a deep view into the business and the sales side, which really gives advantage to us as technical leaders when that next CTO or CIO role may open up.
Mm-hmm. And I know we've touched about this next question briefly before, but in your opinion, shifting gears and talking about the industry slightly, what do you think we'll see in the cybersecurity industry next?
You're gonna laugh at me if I say AI and Chat GPT. I think we'll see a ton of startups say they're leveraging AI. We already are, right? I get a new email, it seems like every week, about somebody touting their latest AI and innovation. CrowdStrike has an entire persona that was on the Super Bowl. They're in the Super Bowl commercial, Charlotte AI. So I expect to see more and more of that kind of stuff. And then we'll see who I kind of see this as kind of like a .com bubble 2.0, right? You're going to have this giant gold rush of everybody rushing in to try and do it. And then you're going to end up with a couple of companies that do it well, a couple of companies that integrate it into their products. And then those will be kind of the market leaders on the go forward.
Yeah. Well, interesting to, looking forward to that. We'll see how this will pan out. In terms of, budget planning, any major changes? I always pick COVID as as a point in time, like anything pre-COVID, post-COVID that you can point to?
Yeah, I think we're getting a little bit further away from COVID now. So, but there was a tremendous investment in InfoSec tools and technologies post-COVID. When we saw all these people go to remote work, then we had to have tools like Zscaler, for example, that would allow these folks to work remotely and securely. Whereas, before they were sitting in an office, they were behind maybe a Palo firewall or whatever, and they were able to work and they had the protections. And so we saw kind of a big jump in investment right after that to kind of support this remote work culture. And then as we've kind of settled down into status quo with this hybrid, maybe return to work, I've seen it kind of flatten out. So really there's not, in recent history, I haven't seen any large growth into that. As I mentioned, I've got all the tools and technologies that I need. Now, obviously, when you come into a new organization, and if I were to start at a different org, we'd probably make some investments depending on how we prioritized and connected to the risk. But in general, for me, it's pretty flat. I have added some headcount due to some M&A work that we did recently, but in general, not seeing a lot of, like I said, I don't need any new tools or technologies. I've got what I need, and how do we just kind of do better, get the ROI of the tools that we have in place.
Mm-hmm. And how do you define typically innovation in our space? Is it more? I know you mentioned, I wouldn't say your dislike of tools, but you're pretty much full of it, I think, in terms of tools. So what would you define as innovation? Is it just like a new service, a new way to monetize services? What is it?
Yeah, I think there's a couple pieces here. One is about doing what we already do more efficiently. There's a ton of manual processes in every security organization I've ever been a part of. We take scans and we create tickets, and maybe so small things like bidirectional Jira integrations are huge, right? They can really break down walls, and shifting left and getting IDEs that are doing the scans in place and building it into the CI/CD pipelines. But all of that is pretty well established, right? But what we can do to get all that information maybe into a single pane of glass. I've been a part of orgs that have purchased very expensive tools that supposedly provided a single pane of glass, and I've yet to see one do it very, very well. There's certainly some guys out there that do okay, and certainly not anything specific to cyber. I've started using actual data analytic tools, data aggregation platforms. Think of things like Snowflake, for example, that are built to just aggregate data, and they're not cyber specific. And putting that onto a single pane of glass, so that I, as a leader, have that visibility into the organization, so that we can see at a single point how we're doing, how we're performing. Because as I mentioned, I've got too many tools to keep up with now, right? We've got endpoint detections, we've got SIM solutions, we got data ingest volumes. I've got all these various KPIs that are really important to me and I need to manage, but bouncing between 5 or 6 different platforms to get that information is certainly a problem. So anything that can help, put it onto a single pane of glass, aggregate the data together, the person who solves that problem will certainly drive a lot of innovation in this space. And you're kind of seeing it too with all the acquisitions. The Checkmarks, for example, has the Checkmarks One platform where they're trying to put SAST and DAST and the various solutions all together, or CrowdStrike acquiring 57 companies in the last year, or Wiz acquiring a bunch of companies. You're seeing these kind of platform plays that eventually I think we may see that single pane of glass, or at least maybe 2 or 3 panes of glass instead of 6 or 7 individual ones.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk a bit about the vendors, if possible. What's the best way for a vendor to, reach out to someone like you, in your opinion?
Yeah, the biggest thing is figuring out when my budget cycle is and target me kind of in alignment with that. I don't know anyone out there who has hundreds of thousands of dollars at their disposal unless it's budget time or you're having a major incident, right? And nobody wants that, they call them ambulance chasers, right? Oh, there's a security incident, I'll go try and sell this product. So unless I'm kind of at budget time is when I'm really making those pitches. And it really gives us the bang for the buck, right? I don't really want to, on a Friday at 4:30 get a phone call on your latest product when I'm not even in budget time, right? So the best piece is learning what our budget cycle is and kind of attaching to that point.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's good advice. And what is it that you are looking for in a vendor?
Yeah, so everything's a SaaS platform now, right? I think everybody wants the OpEx money versus the CapEx large drop, right? So when I'm looking at these SaaS vendors typically is I'm looking for a true partner. SaaS means software as a service. The service aspect is really important to that. People are the key to making all this technology do what it's supposed to do. I think you can probably tell at this point that I'm big on what, smart people can do empowered by technology. So I'm looking for a vendor that, is going to do, regular reviews with us, health checks on the platform, tell us about the latest and greatest innovations, help us drive to get the ROI from the tools, and then organically allow us to grow the relationship instead of just saying, oh yeah, well, here's the latest, here's renewal time, here's your, 10% uplift. I'll see you in a year. That's the part that kind of rubs me the wrong way. And I've got great vendors that we have great partnerships with. We have, maybe a weekly or bi-weekly cadence, or depending on the vendor, maybe it's a QBR where we do a quarterly business review and talk about it, depending on how dynamic the engagement is. But I'm looking for somebody that calls me a little bit more often than just at renewal time when they want my money.
Understood. Any people out there in the industry or outside of it that have been influential to you?
Yeah, Elon Musk is certainly somebody that's really interesting to follow. He's kind of eccentric some days, right? But you got to give the guy kind of some kudos for innovation, between PayPal and then taking that money and then turning it over and investing it all in SpaceX and nearly going broke with that, and Tesla, being I think one of the only automakers in the United States that, one of two that have never gone bankrupt, right, is certainly an interesting one. The innovation that he pushes and some of the things he's been able to accomplish are certainly big pieces for me. And then, I've had some great leadership that I worked under throughout my last 10, 15 years. A VP of InfoSec that I worked underneath at XPO Logistics was really a great leader, in particular, that I learned from, and a couple of directors along the way that have been great mentors to me and kind of helped me push along the path and learn a lot in the organization and how to be successful and how to secure systems, right? Because you can read about this stuff in a book, you can take a test, you can go get a certification, but how do you actually put these things into practice is certainly a little bit of a different challenge. And a lot of good folks along the way kind of make us successful. And that's why I try to get back now with either mentoring local high school students or, anybody that's, trying to get a job into cybersecurity that I kind of come across. I'm happy to share, this is what I did, A+, Net Plus, Security Plus, and then go find you a job in IT, right? That's kind of what I look at.
Well, thank you so far, and we're almost at the end of our episode today. Let's just give out some bit more information to our listeners out there. What's the best way to reach out to you, connect with you online?
Yeah. So you can connect with me on LinkedIn. Always happy to do those connections. Attend some conferences. Like I just spoke at Secure World Charlotte, and I'll probably be going to the AWS conference later this year, maybe Falcon with CrowdStrike, a few different ones. And then, for vendors in particular, right, I think it's really important that they attend those events, support those events. It may feel like, you're sitting there maybe wasting your time, but I actually use that time to walk the vendor hall and to look at the latest and greatest solutions because I'm not distracted. I'm not trying to maintain run a meeting or bouncing back and forth. You're much more likely to get my attention at those, conferences and maybe in the vendor hall when I'm in that mindset of, what's out there, what's new, than at 4:30 on a Friday, whenever you call my personal cell phone and I'm just going to hit the ignore button and screen that out. So yeah, that would be it, and happy to connect with any of the listeners out there.
Got it. Thank you. So one final question: if money was never an issue, what would you do with your life?
I'd be sitting on a beach with some pretty blue water, hanging out with my daughter and my family, and really enjoying life. I love to vacation, love to sit on white sand and blue water, either Hawaii. We did a trip there a couple of years ago. It was amazing going there. Or even in the Caribbean, there's a lot of great places in the Caribbean. I saw, we were in St. John recently and really enjoyed that. So it's that would be the piece. But as much as I say that, after a week or two or maybe 3, I might get a little bit bored and have to hop back into working on something, making a startup or something like that. But that's at least what I would like to imagine to do.
Well, I can tell you, sitting on a beach for long does get tiring. And, I've done that in Thailand probably, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago now. But yeah, it's fun. But at some point, yeah, you need to get moving and do something. That was my experience.
Sure.
Well, great. Thank you so much for taking the time today, Chad. It was a pleasure meeting with you. Any final thoughts?
No, this is great. Really appreciate the opportunity to come on. It's a really awesome platform you have here, and love to hear what others on the platform share. It's a great podcast, and listeners are lucky to have it.
Thank you for the kind words.